Thanks for joining us here. We want to talk about your book. This is very exciting. Tell us about the book about the Apple Cup.
Yeah, I I heard, I was covering UW football back in the mid 90s, and somebody mentioned one day, there'd never been a book on the Apple Cup done. And so I thought, gee, that's interesting. At that point, I had done one book, and I would later do a few more. So I was always kind of interested in long form journalism. And as I said to somebody recently, you can't get much more long form than a book. And so uh, about 2005, I started to do a lot of microfilm newspaper research with the
Wow.
idea that I wanted to go back and have an account of every game in the history of the rivalry. And it goes back to 1900. So we're talking
Jeez.
some pretty sketchy microfilm back
Wow.
in those days. And so spent a lot of time, in my spare time, again, about starting about 2005 for 2 or 3 years, uh, going back and researching games during the 20th century and so forth. And then finally, about 3 years after that, I decided, I was still working, and I decided, if I was going to do this, I'd probably be better doing it in retirement, knowing that I would need to do a lot of interviewing and whatnot. So I did a couple of books, and in fact, one of them was on Gonzaga hoops, called Glory Hounds, published in 2016. And anyway, right after the pandemic in 2020, I kind of decided, gee, if I was going to take advantage of all this research I had done, I better get on it. And I really dived into the interviewing process, and obviously after that, the writing.
Yeah. So the title is Too Good to Be Through. Tell us what's the inspiration behind the title of the book?
Well, there's a lot of angst, at least on the WSU side, I think, about whether the rivalry will continue with the crazy new chaotic landscape of realignment and so forth, with Washington having gone off to the Big Ten, made that decision 2 years ago. And you've got, obviously, you have scheduling uh, uh, restrictions and so forth, and their first priority has to be Big Ten scheduling. And Washington also has I think, I think a general template on scheduling where they want to have at least 7 home games a year, because uh, they're such big money makers over here. And um, so that further constricts the possibility that you can accommodate a home and home series with WSU. There's a lot of it looks like Washington may go the way of a lot of other schools and try to have a big non-conference game with probably like an SEC school annually. They're doing that with Tennessee in 29 and 30. And by my reckoning, if they were to do that annually, it would be difficult to accommodate a home and home with WSU at the same time. So there's natural angst and anticipation over whether what is now a 125-year tradition with the Apple Cup, whether that will actually continue beyond the current uh, contract, which goes through 2028.
Wow. So you are, speaking of that, you are no stranger to the Apple Cup. You are a retired writer. You've covered this rivalry at least for 3 decades or so, at least.
Right.
And then, but the rivalry is very old. What are some things that surprised you about the rivalry that you didn't know about that you found out through your research?
Tim, probably the predominant thing was these two schools have been arguing and bickering over things for well more than a century. They as I mentioned, they began playing uh, in 1900, but they didn't even go a decade without disagreements over whether uh, whether they would. It's funny to even bring this up because I just mentioned going forward, playing the question of whether they'd play home and home. Well, they essentially argued over that back in like 1905, 1906. And so they had these scheduling disagreements. And of course, uh, the Huskies felt they could draw bigger crowds here and make more money here. And so there were at least uh, two periods that I can think of, and possibly three off the top of my head, where they didn't play each other just because of those disagreements.
Wow.
They went from 1914 to 1917 without playing, so 2 years in between there. Just things like that. You wouldn't think necessarily that these two schools would have been at each other's throats way back when, but indeed they were.
Wow. And so obviously, UW leads the series. Why do you think WSU and UW have this spirited rivalry that's endured all of that for so many decades? Do you think the fans really still enjoy it, or have you seen things kind of change over the years?
Yeah, I think it's largely still enjoyed. Of course, the question is, will that dynamic change now with I mean, WSU's resources have been, crimped by the realignment thing and by the name, image, and likeness thing, where you need a lot more money to make things work, and you would just hope that there's not a bigger gulf or too pronounced a gulf between the two programs. But I think the fans, uh, by and large, love the rivalry. I mean, I think the two sides appreciate each other. It might not always show, but I think they realize it's been a really cool rivalry, and in my mind, it's probably a unique rivalry, and I don't take that word lightly, but it's it matches two schools and two areas that are so different. I mean, the curricula of the two schools so different. You've got the rural campus versus the major metropolis. You've got the uh, such a geographic difference. I mean, our the geography over there is so different from over here on the west side. The climates are even different. I mean, they're just you don't typically see this these major differences in an in-state rivalry in college football. So I think it's unique.
And speaking of that, how would you compare this rivalry to other rivalries in the country? There's some pretty big rivalries across the country. How do you think this one stacks up?
Well, I think in my mind it's underrated. I certainly wouldn't argue that it's anything like Ohio State, Michigan, or Alabama, Auburn. Um, and then you've got some really cool, intersectional rivalries like USC and Stanford,
Hmm.
or I'm sorry, USC and Notre Dame. I,
Right.
I was confusing because Stanford has played Notre Dame uh, pretty regularly as well. But um, I mean, it's an underrated rivalry, and even as Washington has had such a big edge in it, it's also been a breeding ground for some really memorable WSU upsets. Like you don't have to remind Husky fans that in '82 and '83 they were all set to go to the Rose Bowl and whatnot, and I, th uh, I think it seems to me one fan told me that he was in a restroom during one of those games and overheard some Husky fans talking about their plans for Pasadena and whatnot. Well, lo and behold, the Cougars in '82 and '83, both as double-digit underdogs in those games, upset the Huskies, and and sent them to a different bowl game. And so it's been, even as Washington has had the edge in a one-sided rivalry, it's there have been some pretty memorable upsets, and by and large it's been relatively within that. There's been an awful lot of games that have been really competitive.
I haven't read your book yet, but I did read a quick little excerpt, and it says there's a line that talks about detailing the stories and shenanigans of the historical Apple Cup series. What are the shenanigans that people can expect to read in the book?
Well, there's one of the things that I was really dead set on was in addition to the year by year accounts, I didn't want it to read like a history book.
Mm.
Wanted it to be wanted one major component of the book to be the fun side of it, the relationships that Huskies have with Cougars. And I'm not talking about coaches or players necessarily, but just the over the back fence, your Husky or your Cougar is your neighbor, and how you get along with them and so forth. So I detail some of the pranks that have been played over the years, and just some of the memorable fun things. For example, when Rick Neuheisel was UW coach from 99 to 2002, he went 4-0 in Apple Cups, and he had a tradition. I guess I guess you'd say uh, an odd tradition. It was at his home on the Lake Washington on the east side in Bellevue, uh, where he, he had there was a dock at the base of the property, and he would always have a party that night, and for him it was always a victory party where. Um, and one of the aspects of this party was everybody was encouraged to take the quote unquote Apple Cup plunge into the lake. Well, the
Nice.
guests would strip down to bathing suits and take this quick dip in the lake, which of course at that time of year, like the third week in
Sure.
November, it was pretty chilly out there. Not only the lake, but the ambient temperature. And so anyway, he one of these years he was as he related to me, he was standing in his kitchen and with his athletic director, Barbara Hedges, who was the woman who had hired him, and a major benefactor at Washington, Neil Dempsey, who gave rise, whose donation gave rise to the Dempsey indoor facility
Mm.
at Washington. And so, anyway, Rick was trying to urge Barbara to take the Apple Cup plunge, and she wouldn't do it. And uh, and Neil Dempsey said, "Well, how about if I give you a $2 million donation to the UW?" And she still wouldn't do it. And
What?
and, and according to Neuheisel, he said, or she said, "What would I do with my hair?" So anyway, she wouldn't do it. And word was, I guess, Neil Dempsey ended up eventually giving the $2 million anyway. But at least at that moment, she wasn't going to take the bait for the $2 million donation. So anyway, things like that, just fun stuff. Unlikely alliances in the workplace of Cougars and Huskies, and things like that. I thought it was really important to have a heavy dose of that in the book.
Wow. Based on all the research and the film and all the writings that you've been through, what do you think makes this rivalry so divided? I know right now we're in such a political divide right now, but this rivalry has seemed to be really divided, and it seems like the ultimate betrayal if someone were to cross over to the other side. Just most recently, obviously, like Pat Chun going to UW. Can you talk a little bit about that where this kind of that those feelings come from on both sides, or do you see that it's more Cougs that don't like the Huskies? What kind of vibe do you get?
I would suggest it's probably rooted more in the Cougar feelings about the Huskies. I mean,
Yeah.
there's definite there's a definite feeling among a lot of Cougs that they're looked down upon by the Huskies, and you get that some from some people you get that vibe about, well, they consider us their little brother, which really grates on a lot of people, um, and the fact that, I mean, when you're in that position of having won whatever it would be, 27, 28% of the games, you're naturally kind of the underdog. You adopt that underdog mentality. And meanwhile, on the Washington side, I had uh, a prominent Husky, Chuck Nelson, who was the record-setting place kicker for them, and later on radio analyst on the UW network. I had him say that a lot of he thinks a lot of Husky fans look upon WSU as an irritant, quote unquote, that as he put it, kind of a game where we have to deal with these guys type of thing, and it's whether I assume that's probably the feeling that Chuck said it was. I assume that's probably the feeling among a lot of UW fans. And of course, when WSU fans hear things like that, it makes their skin crawl.
But do you think the rivalry should continue?
Yeah, absolutely. Thus the title, Too Good to Be Through. I for the reasons I mentioned, I just think it's been so much a part of the state. It's been ingrained in the ethos of the state. I mean, it's annually the automatically the most important sporting date on the schedule, at least scheduled. I mean, things do come up with the Mariners. I mean, if they have a playoff game coming up here, which it looks like they're going to, and games, I should say, those will be more important. Or if the Seahawks are playing the 49ers to go to the Super Bowl like they had years ago, that becomes more important. But the biggest event on the sporting calendar annually, at least at that time, is the Apple Cup, and so it would be a shame to see it go away.
What do you hope people take away when they read your book?
Uh, Primarily, I guess twofold. If you happen to have had a great grandfather who played at WSU or Washington, back in 1923, and you want to go back and see what happened that year, it's in there for you. There's an account of that game, and who knows, maybe that great grandfather's name is in that account. Uh, so that the history is in there, and I really tried hard to uh, contextualize each season so that it's not just a narrow account of each game. It's kind of, okay, how did they get to this game? What kind of a season were they having? Were there other things that were notable coming into that game and so forth? But then, as I mentioned, the other component of this is just the fun that the rivalry engenders. I mean, the trash talking. I've got a whole separate chapter in there on the history of trash talking in the Apple Cup, and uh, just the fun stuff, the sidelight type stuff, the anecdotal stuff
Mm.
that really makes the thing tick, I think.
Tell folks how they can get a copy of your book.
Sure, it's on sale at Amazon, of course, and you can get it in brick and mortar stores as well, Barnes and Noble, or if you have a favorite indie bookstore, they should, if they don't have it, they'll be able to order it. I'm also doing some signing events over in Spokane and Pullman this weekend, which I don't know if you want to hear about those, but
Sure.
yeah, I've got Auntie's bookstore in Spokane from noon on Friday to either 2 or 3. I think we're going to determine that on the fly. And then there's a WSU alumni function event at 5:30 from 5:30 to 7:30 Friday night at Flat Stick Pub in Spokane. And then on game day, another WSU alumni event at the Lewis Alumni Center from 11:30 to 1:30. And finally, a signing at the bookie, the bookstore, from 2 to 4 p.m. right before game time. So would love to see people come out and would love to sign and chat about the Apple Cup.
All right, Bud, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time.
Absolutely, Tim. It was really fun. I hope you have a great trip.
Yeah, thank you. And go Cougs. I'm excited to read your book while I'm abroad.
Okay,
I'll
sounds
have to
good.
order a hard copy too. Well, thank
Yeah,
you.
absolutely. Thank you, Tim.
Thanks, Bud. Have a good day.
Yeah, you as well.
Bye.